Walter, you're retired. Stay home. This is for the new generation. The words sliced through the air like a knife. For a moment, I thought the clinking glasses and the laughter from the ballroom would drown them out, but they didn't. They rang louder than the jazz band in the corner, sharper than the crystal chandeliers overhead. My son-in-law, Brandon Cole, leaned back in his chair, smirking with the kind of arrogance only a man drunk on power could carry. The whole table burst into laughter. Some laughed nervously, not wanting to be caught silent. Others laughed heartily, glad for the show. I stood there, glass of champagne trembling in my hand, while the glow of 100 golden bulbs cast shadows across my wrinkled face. I had walked into this hotel ballroom, polished marble floors, towering arrangements of lilies. Waiters in crisp black vests, thinking I would share a simple moment of pride with my daughter and her husband. Instead, I had become the punchline. I tightened my grip on the glass until the stem threatened to snap. My daughter Rebecca's eyes flickered toward me. For the briefest second, I thought she might speak, might tell Brandon to stop. But she lowered her gaze to her napkin instead. My throat burned, not from the champagne, but from the humiliation pressing down on me in front of a room full of people half my age. People who had no idea what it had taken to keep Brandon's world from collapsing years ago. I placed the glass down quietly, steadying my hand so not a drop spilled. No words left my mouth. Not then. I only nodded once, turned, and walked away while the laughter continued behind me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The hotel's lobby was grand, the kind of place where marble met glass and the doorman's suit probably cost more than the car I drove. I stepped out onto the New York sidewalk, the late evening air biting my lungs. The neon lights painted the street in restless colors, red, blue, green, like the city itself had no time to sleep. Cabs honked. Strangers hurried by, their coats pulled tight. To them, I was invisible. Just another old man walking out of a building too expensive for his kind. But inside me, something stirred. A fire that humiliation had only fed. I kept walking, passing the glittering display windows, past the doorman who barely nodded past the scent of expensive cigars wafting from a balcony above. My mind wasn't in Manhattan anymore. It was back in Jersey on the narrow streets where Rebecca grew up, in the small house where every nail and beam had been paid for with sweat from my back. When I reached my car parked a block away, I sat there for a while, hands resting on the steering wheel. I could still hear the echo of Brandon's voice, smug and careless. Stay home. This is for the new generation. I thought of the years when his new generation wasn't enough to pay the bills. I thought of the phone calls I answered late at night, the frantic way he'd asked for help when deals fell apart, when banks threatened foreclosure. I thought of the checks I wrote, the signatures I placed as guarantor, the promises I made to keep his dreams alive because my daughter loved him. And now he had the audacity to mock me in front of strangers. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I pulled into a quiet diner on the corner, the kind that had neon signs buzzing and coffee that tasted burnt but strong. The waitress, a woman about my age, poured me a cup without asking. She'd seen me before. Folks like us always found comfort in the same booths under the same flickering lights. You look like you've had a night, she said, sliding the cup toward me. I just nodded. My voice wouldn't come out. I stirred the coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl like smoke and water. Across the room, a group of younger men in suits laughed loudly, their phones lighting up with emails, stock tickers, and news alerts. They looked like Brandon's crowd, hungry, slick, untouchable. But I knew better. I knew what paper shields their confidence was built on. Paper could burn, paper could be torn. I drove home after midnight. My little house in the suburbs felt quieter than usual, the creak of the porch step greeting me like an old friend. The porch light flickered and I reminded myself to change the bulb. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood polish and old books. On the table by the recliner sat my weekly pill organizer, each compartment carefully filled. A sign of age I didn't hide anymore. I was 72. I had earned every wrinkle, every ache in my joints. I sank into the chair, rubbing my temples. My daughter's face wouldn't leave my mind, her silence, the way she looked down at her napkin while her husband humiliated me. Did she agree with him? Did she think I should just fade away too? I reached for the picture frame on the side table. It held a photo of Rebecca when she was just a child, her arms around my neck. her smile big enough to light a room. I remembered working double shifts just to buy her that winter coat she wore in the photo. I remembered her voice calling me daddy like I was her whole world. Now I was just an old man told to stay out of sight. But that night sitting there, in the quiet of my home, I realized something silence cuts both ways. Brandon thought my silence at the table was weakness. He didn't understand that silence can also be the sharpest blade. I didn't sleep much that night. The bed felt too large, the house too quiet. The laughter from the ballroom followed me home, echoing in my ears every time I shut my eyes. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, its blades turning slow and steady, as if mocking how time dragged on when you wanted it to hurry. By dawn, I gave up trying to rest and shuffled into the kitchen. The kettle hissed as I made my morning tea. On the table sat yesterday's paper folded neatly beside my pill organizer. Little white and blue tablets waited in their plastic compartments, a reminder that age doesn't give you the courtesy of forgetting. My hands shook just enough that I had to steady the teacup with both palms. I sat down the paper still unopened and let my mind wander. The insult at the hotel wasn't the first. No, it had been brewing for years, each small jab a cut that I'd chosen to ignore. But now, after that public spectacle, all these moments paraded back through my memory, demanding attention. I remembered one Thanksgiving a few years back. Rebecca had set a long table in their Manhattan apartment. Candles lit the smell of turkey and pumpkin pie filling the air. Brandon had carved the bird with a flourish, then poured himself another glass of wine. I had told a story one I'd told before about the early days on the construction crews, about how we worked double shifts to finish the Lincoln Tunnel repairs. Rebecca had always loved those stories as a girl. But that night Brandon rolled his eyes. "You really think anyone wants to hear about digging holes and pouring concrete?" he said, smirking. "Those days are gone, Walter. We live in a different world now." Some guests chuckled. Rebecca pressed her lips together, her eyes darting away from mine. I forced a smile, cut another slice of pie, and swallowed the sting. Another memory pressed in the Sunday service at the church Rebecca and Brandon sometimes attended. Afterward, while folks gathered for coffee and donuts in the fellowship hall, Brandon had boasted about a real estate deal, tossing numbers around like confetti. When someone asked about the risk, he laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. "Not a problem. My father-in-law signs anything I put in front of him." "Don't you, Walter?" The men around us laughed politely, not realizing the truth in his words. I had signed yes more than once, and I had never admitted to anyone how it gnawed at me. Rebecca had been standing nearby, paper cup in hand. She looked down into her coffee as if the swirl of cream could spare her from the moment. Then there was the day at the dealership. Brandon had insisted we all go test drive a luxury SUV. He strutted around the showroom talking to the salesman like he was a celebrity. At one point, he tossed me the keys and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't scratch it, old man. This car costs more than your whole house." The salesman laughed uncertainly. Rebecca flushed, but said nothing. I handed the keys back, heart pounding, jaw tight. That was the day I realized that every bit of respect Brandon showed me was theater, and even that act was fading. Now in the dim morning light of my kitchen, those memories stacked on top of one another until they pressed down like bricks on my chest. I reached for the pill box, popped open Tuesday's compartment, and swallowed the tablets dry. The bitterness coated my throat. I looked at the photograph on the fridge. Rebecca in her graduation gown standing between me and her late mother. Her smile had been so bright that day. I had thought, she'll never forget where she came from, but now I wasn't so sure. I whispered into the silence, almost surprising myself with the sound of my own voice. I built bridges my whole life, yet I can't cross to my own daughter. The words hung in the air heavier than the steam rising from my untouched tea. The day dragged on, though I barely left my chair. Outside, the world went about its business, the mail truck rattling down the street, kids shouting as they hurried to school, but inside my house it felt like the air itself had thickened. When the mail finally dropped in through the slot, I forced myself to stand and fetch it. A few envelopes scattered on the rug. Medicare reminders, a notice from the electric company, a flyer from the neighborhood association about a summer block party. I picked them up slowly, my knees creaking. Each paper reminded me of the life I lived now, steady, predictable, the kind that asked for less and less of me each year. And yet Brandon's words still clung to me like burrs. Stay home. Retired. Out of the way. I set the envelopes on the kitchen counter without opening them. Instead, I poured another cup of tea and wandered out to the porch. The wooden step let out its familiar groan, a sound that had always meant I was home. I sat in the old rocker and let it sway. Across the street, Mrs. Anderson was watering her flowers. She waved. I waved back, forcing a smile. But my thoughts wandered to Rebecca again. I wondered if she even realized how deep the silence between us had grown. She called sometimes, yes, but it was often rushed. Dad, I can't talk long. Dad, Brandon has a meeting, we'll call later. I told myself it was just the pace of their lives in the city. Still, I couldn't ignore the way her eyes darted away last night, the way her lips pressed shut instead of forming words. I found myself back at the diner the next evening, sliding into the same booth I had sat in the night Brandon made a fool of me. The vinyl seat creaked under my weight, and the smell of fried bacon and coffee grounds wrapped around me like an old blanket. I hadn't planned on coming here, but sometimes your feet carry you to the places where your heart knows it'll be less lonely. The waitress, Linda, poured my coffee without asking. She gave me the kind of look that said she remembered last night but wouldn't bring it up unless I did. I nodded my thanks, stirring in a packet of sugar, though I barely tasted anything these days. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked Frank Dawson. Same broad shoulders, though stooped now, same square jaw under a cap that had seen better days. We'd poured concrete, side by side 40 years ago, worked the kind of jobs that wore holes in your boots before they wore holes in your spirit. Frank had been a Marine before that, and sometimes you could still see the discipline in the way he carried himself. "Walter," he said, spotting me right off a voice carrying across the room. He slid into the booth opposite mine without waiting for an invite. "Heard you were in here last night. You look like a man who didn't sleep." I gave a dry chuckle. "You heard right." Linda came by with another mug poured for Frank and left us to it. For a while we just sat there, sipping, letting the hum of the diner fill the silence. Finally, Frank leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Word gets around," he said. "Your son-in-law, he cut you down in front of a whole room." I stared into my cup, watching the dark liquid ripple. That's one way to put it. Frank grunted. I never liked the look of him. Slick hair, fast smile. Men like that don't respect the backs that carried them. His words landed heavy, maybe because I knew he was right. I thought back to the years when Brandon's ventures had failed one after another, when late-night phone calls had dragged me out of bed to sign documents I barely understood. "You can't let that boy walk all over you," Walt Frank said firmly. "You've given enough. At some point, a man's got to draw a line." I looked up at him, then really looked. Frank had lines on his face carved by war, by labor, by time, but there was steel in his eyes. He wasn't just talking about pride. He was talking about dignity, the one thing we had left when the world tried to strip everything else away. It was then that Samuel Price walked in. He didn't come here often, not with his polished shoes and tailored suits, but tonight he stepped through the door, scanning the room until his eyes landed on me. "Walter," he said warmly, sliding into the booth beside Frank. "Been a long time." Samuel had been our crew's go-to guy whenever the union contracts got messy, back when he was just starting out in law. He'd built himself a fine career since then, estate planning, business law, the sort of work that made or broke families. I hadn't seen him in years, though we still exchanged Christmas cards. "You're a sight," I said, shaking his hand. "What brings you down to this side of town?" "Frank called me," he said, nodding toward our old friend. "Said you could use a friendly ear." I shot Frank a look, but he just shrugged. "Some things you don't carry alone." Samuel leaned back, ordered a slice of pie, and let me talk. I told them about the ballroom, about the laughter, about Rebecca's silence. Words spilled easier than I thought they would. When I finished, the pie sat untouched in front of him, and he tapped his fork against the plate. "Walter," he said carefully, "I know more than you think about Brandon's empire. I've seen the paperwork over the years. Do you remember those guarantees you signed? Those loans?" My stomach knotted. Of course I remembered. Every signature was etched into me, each one a gamble I had made to protect my daughter's happiness. "Those documents are still active," Samuel went on. "Brandon's standing is built on your name, not his." I felt the blood rush to my ears. I had known deep down, but hearing it out loud sent a current through me. Frank slapped the table. "There it is, Walt. Proof. He's nothing without you." I sat back, the leather seat groaning under me, and let the truth settle. Silence again, but this time not the silence of defeat. It was the silence before a storm. I left the diner with Frank and Samuel that night, the three of us standing under the buzzing neon sign while the summer air pressed warm against our skin. Cars rushed by on the highway, nearby headlights streaking the dark. For a moment, I felt 20 years younger. Three old friends shoulder to shoulder like we used to be when the job was hard and the stakes were higher than anyone guessed. Frank slapped me on the back. "You hear him, Walt. You got the leverage. You just been forgetting it." I nodded, though my chest felt heavy. It wasn't that I didn't understand. It was that Rebecca's face kept flashing in my mind, her downturned eyes at the dinner table, the silence she had chosen over me. Every step I thought about taking against Brandon meant dragging her into the storm, too. Samuel adjusted his tie, looking more out of place under the neon glow than he ever had in a courtroom. "Walter, I know this isn't easy, but men like Brandon, they mistake kindness for weakness. You've carried him long enough. You need to ask yourself what happens if you don't act." His words hung there sharp as the hum of the sign above us. The Manhattan apartment smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, the kind of scent that made visitors remark on its elegance, though to me it always felt a little too staged. I had been to my daughter's home countless times, yet every visit left me unsettled, as if I had stepped into a showroom rather than a place where a family truly lived. That night, Rebecca sat curled on the edge of a cream-colored sofa, a book open in her lap, though I could tell her eyes weren't moving across the page. Brandon paced near the tall windows that overlooked the city, phone pressed to his ear, voice low but urgent. The hum of traffic rose from the street below, blending with the rhythm of his words. "Yes, yes, the expansion will go through," he said. "The old man's nothing to worry about. Once he's out of the picture, everything will finally be ours." The words weren't meant for her, but Rebecca heard them anyway. Her fingers tightened around the spine of the book, knuckles pale. She stared at the lines of print, but saw only her father's face, the look in his eyes when Brandon humiliated him in that ballroom. She had lowered her own eyes, then unable to speak. Now the silence pressed on her chest like a weight. Brandon ended the call, tossing the phone onto the table with a sharp clatter. He ran a hand through his hair and began outlining plans to no one in particular, his voice rising with excitement. "New contracts, new investors. The Cole name will be everywhere. It's just a matter of time." Rebecca swallowed hard. She wanted to ask what he had meant out of the picture, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she closed the book gently and placed it on the coffee table, her movements careful, deliberate, as though steady hands might calm the storm inside her. Later, when Brandon retreated to his study, Rebecca drifted into the kitchen. The counters gleamed under recessed lights, the stainless steel appliances reflecting her pale face. She filled a glass with water and leaned against the sink, letting the coolness of the glass ground her. Her mind wandered back to childhood, to a night when thunder shook the little house in Jersey. She had been terrified, the storm rattling the windows, but her father had sat with her on the floor, flashlight in hand, telling stories until her tears dried. He had always been that steady presence, even after her mother's illness left them both raw and aching. He never once let her feel abandoned. Now she thought of him walking out of that ballroom, shoulders squared against the laughter, silent but unbroken. She wondered if she had broken something more precious in that moment. His trust, his belief that she would stand by him as he had always stood by her. Rebecca pressed the rim of the glass to her lips but couldn't swallow. The water tasted bitter, as though guilt had seeped into it. She moved back to the living room and stood near the window. Manhattan glittered beneath her towers, shining against the night sky. People rushing, deals being made, fortunes shifting hands in the space of a phone call. It was the world Brandon loved, the world he wanted her to embrace fully. Yet her heart tugged toward a smaller place. The porch in Jersey, the creak of old wood, the smell of her father's pipe smoke drifting into the evening air. She imagined him sitting there alone now, and the ache grew unbearable. The door to the study opened. Brandon appeared, his expression sharp. "You're quiet tonight." "Something wrong?" Rebecca forced a smile. "Just tired." He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be busy." He kissed her cheek lightly before disappearing again, already consumed by his own ambitions. Rebecca touched the spot where his lips had brushed her skin. It felt cold. She turned back to the city lights, heart pounding with the weight of her silence. She stood at a crossroads, one path leading deeper into Brandon's world, the other back toward her father. And though she said nothing, the choice was already beginning to take shape in her heart. Sleep didn't come easily for Rebecca that night. She tossed beneath silk sheets, staring at the ceiling where the city's glow leaked in through the curtains. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's shoulders stiffen as he walked away from that ballroom, his silence louder than any outburst could have been. Beside her, Brandon slept soundly, breathing deep, one arm sprawled across the bed as though claiming the whole space. His phone still blinked on the nightstand, messages piling up, but he didn't stir. Rebecca turned her back to him, clutching the sheet to her chest. In the stillness, she thought of her childhood bedroom, the posters taped crookedly on the walls, the quilt her mother had sewn before the illness took her. She remembered nights when she'd wake from a nightmare and run down the hall. Her father would always be there, lifting her onto his lap, whispering that she was safe. His warmth had been her shield then. And now she had sat silent, while another man, the man she married, stripped him of that same dignity. The next morning, Rebecca found herself wandering through the apartment, restless. Brandon was already gone off to his meetings. His tie knotted perfectly, his cologne hanging in the air long after the door shut. She made coffee but barely touched it, the bitterness matching the taste in her mouth. She carried the cup into the study, where stacks of contracts and glossy folders covered the desk. Numbers sprawled across pages, charts climbing and falling. She had once tried to understand the intricacies of Brandon's business, but it had felt like quicksand, every step sinking her deeper until she stopped asking questions. On top of one stack lay a folder stamped in bold letters, "Guarantee." She didn't open it, but the word alone was enough to send her heart racing. She knew her father's name had been on documents like these. She had heard whispers, seen the way Brandon deflected when she asked too much. "Once your father is out of the picture?" The phrase echoed in her head again. What did Brandon really mean? Out of the picture, how Rebecca closed the folder quickly, guilt washing over her. She shouldn't be prying, but part of her needed to know. Needed to protect the man who had once carried her through every storm. That afternoon, she called her father's number. The line rang, then clicked to voicemail. She hung up without leaving a message. What could she say that she was sorry, that she should have spoken up? Words seemed too small to mend the crack that had formed between them. She walked to the window again, city sounds swelling up from below. Somewhere out there, her father was sitting in his old chair, listening to the creak of his porch, the hum of his refrigerator, living a quieter life. And she, surrounded by glass and steel, couldn't escape the weight of silence. Rebecca pressed her forehead against the cool glass and whispered, though no one could hear, not even herself fully, "I don't know how much longer I can stay quiet." The words fogged the window briefly, then vanished, leaving no trace, just like her silence in that ballroom. Only this time she felt the choice pressing closer, demanding an answer she could no longer avoid. Samuel's office was tucked inside a red brick building downtown, the kind with ivy crawling up one side and a brass plaque by the door. I hadn't been there in years. Walking into the cool lobby, I could almost smell the weight of all the lives that had been shaped in rooms like these marriages. Sealed estates, divided futures written in ink. The secretary, a young woman with a tidy bun, recognized me from Samuel's instructions and ushered me inside. His office hadn't changed much since I last saw it. Shelves lined with law books, photographs of his grandchildren, and a mahogany desk polished to a shine. Behind it, Samuel looked up from a stack of papers, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Walter," he said, standing to shake my hand, "I've been expecting you." I sank into the leather chair opposite him. It creaked under my weight, reminding me of the rocker on my porch at home. The familiarity grounded me, but my stomach twisted all the same. Samuel tapped a thick folder in front of him. "These are the documents we discussed. Every major loan Brandon has taken in the last 10 years. All of them carry your name." I stared at the folder, the edges of the papers bristling like they held teeth ready to bite. My name, my hand, my trust. I had signed those documents thinking I was protecting my daughter's happiness, shoring up Brandon's dreams so Rebecca wouldn't live through hardship like her mother and I once had. Samuel opened the folder and slid a few pages toward me. "Look here. Loan guarantees, personal pledges. The banks only dealt with him because of you. Without these, his entire structure crumbles. I scanned the pages through the words blurred. All I could see was my signature scrawled across the bottom again and again. My throat tightened. If I revoke these, it'll ruin him. Samuel's eyes softened, though his tone stayed firm. Walter, you've carried them for too long. Sometimes letting go is the only way to save them. I leaned back, my chest heavy. Save them. Was that really what this was? My mind raced with images: Rebecca laughing as a girl with a stuffed bear from the county fair. Rebecca's eyes lowered at that dinner table. Brandon's smirk, his words like acid: stay home, old man. This is for the new generation. I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of years pressing down. I had built bridges my whole life, but here I was facing one I couldn't cross without burning it behind me. Samuel said slowly, if I do this, if I take my name away, Rebecca will be caught in the storm. She's already in the storm, Samuel replied quietly. You just haven't been willing to admit it. I closed my eyes. He was right. Every silence, every compromise, every signature had been my way of pretending things weren't as bad as they were. But the truth was, I had only made the fall higher, the crash louder. Samuel slid a pen across the desk. It's your choice, Walter. But I'll tell you, this dignity doesn't survive in silence forever. At some point, you have to speak with words or with action. The pen lay there, simple, ordinary, yet heavier than any hammer I'd ever swung in my life. My hand hovered over it, trembling. For a moment, I heard Brandon's laugh in my head, sharp and dismissive. Then I saw Rebecca's face as a child, trusting me to protect her from storms. My hand closed around the pen. The paper waited. One stroke, and everything would change. I drew in a long breath, the kind you take before stepping into cold water, and signed my name, not as a guarantor, not as a man carrying someone else's weight, but as myself. The sound of the pen scratching across the page was so steady, final. When I set it down, I felt something lift off me like a chain finally unhooked. Samuel gathered the papers with care. It's done, he said. The morning sun cut sharp through the blinds when I woke, but instead of dread weighing me down, there was a strange calm in my chest. The papers were signed. What was done was done. For the first time in years, I felt as though the burden I had carried, often invisible even to those closest to me, had finally been set down. Across town, though, the world was shifting. Cole and Partners Realty had always projected itself as untouchable. Their glass building stood like a beacon in Midtown, polished to a shine that caught the sun. I had been there once, years ago, when Rebecca wanted me to see where Brandon worked. Even then I felt out of place, men in sharp suits, women in heels that clicked across marble floors, everyone moving with purpose, the kind of purpose money lends. But that morning the building looked nothing like the monument it once did. Employees crowded near the entrance, murmuring with anxious faces. Inside, desks were being cleared, cardboard boxes piled high with files and family photos. Phones rang off the hook, but half the calls went unanswered. Brandon stormed down the hallway, phone pressed tight to his ear. His voice boomed, bouncing off glass walls. What do you mean you're pulling out? The contracts are binding. His face was red sweat glistening at his temples. He stopped mid-stride, listening, then slammed a fist against the wall. No, you can't do this. We had a deal, but the line went dead. In one of the conference rooms, a group of employees sat in stunned silence as an HR manager handed out packets, severance terms, instruction for unemployment benefits. Cole and Partners was unraveling faster than anyone could process. A young assistant tried to steady her voice as she asked, "Is this temporary? Just until things get sorted with the banks?" The manager shook his head grimly. "Accounts are frozen. Until further notice, we can't operate." It spread through the office like wildfire. The banks had closed the taps. Without liquidity, every shiny deal Brandon had built collapsed in an instant. Meanwhile, in the lobby, reporters had gathered, microphones extended like spears. A headline had already broken: online crisis at Cole and Partners Realty. The words blared from tablets and phones, spreading faster than Brandon could shout them down. He stormed past, ignoring shouted questions. "Is it true the company is insolvent, Mr. Cole? Are you stepping down?" Cameras flashed, each one a dagger to the image he had so carefully constructed. By the time he reached his office, Brandon's hands were trembling. He swept a pile of papers off his desk, scattering them across the floor. His phone buzzed with calls he couldn't answer fast enough. Everyone carried more bad news: investors pulling out deals, canceled properties slipping away. He grabbed the receiver of his desk phone, barking orders. Get the bank back on the line. Tell them we'll renegotiate. I don't care what it takes. His voice cracked, rage spilling into desperation. For a man who had once mocked me for being old, for being irrelevant, he suddenly looked very small. By midday, chaos had consumed every floor. The polished glass walls now reflected panic. Employees whispered about job postings at rival firms. Laptops were snapped shut. The company that once promised endless growth was bleeding out in real time. Brandon paced like a trapped animal, tie loosened, hair disheveled. His reflection in the glass no longer matched the confident image on the company brochures. It was a man unraveling. And then with a trembling hand he reached for his cell phone. The call connected after 2 rings. Rebecca. He said, his voice breaking, "You need to come home. Everything's falling apart." Rebecca answered in a hushed voice, her eyes darting toward the closed study door. "Brandon, what's happening?" "It's all falling apart." His words came out in ragged gasps. The banks froze everything. Investors are running. Reporters are camped outside. If we don't act now, the company, our entire life is gone. Rebecca's stomach clenched. She looked around the apartment, suddenly seeing every object, the crystal vase, the marble counters, the leather chairs, not as signs of success, but as fragile shells ready to crack. "Brandon," she whispered, "are you saying we've lost everything?" "Not yet," he barked, "but I need you on my side. We have to spin. This call contacts reassure the press. And your father." His voice dropped almost to a growl. "Your father's behind this. I know it. He's always resented me." Rebecca's heart skipped. She had suspected as much since glimpsing those files. The way Brandon said it now, angry, certain, confirmed her worst fears. At the office, Brandon stormed into the main floor, demanding loyalty. "No one leaves. We'll rebuild. This is just a temporary storm." His words sounded hollow against the sight of employees carrying boxes to the elevators. A junior partner muttered under his breath, "Storm, this is a collapse." Brandon spun, catching the man's eye, and for a moment the fury in his face silenced the whole room. But silence didn't mean obedience. Emails pinged across laptops, resignations, job inquiries to competitors. Brandon's empire was bleeding from within. By late afternoon, the press had swelled outside. Headlines screamed Cole and partners on the brink. Anchors speculated live about lawsuits and bankruptcy. Cameras caught every time Brandon shoved past, jaw-tight, sweat staining his collar. Inside, he grabbed the phone again, calling Rebecca once more. This time, his voice cracked, not with rage, but with desperation. "Becca, you have to talk to him. Your father's doing this. He pulled something with the banks. Get him to fix it. He won't listen to me, but he'll listen to you." Rebecca froze in the apartment, the weight of his plea pressing against her chest. She thought of her father on the porch, the sound of his chair creaking in the quiet evening. She thought of the silence she had chosen in the ballroom. And now she heard Brandon begging her to break that silence again, but for his sake, not her own. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I don't know if he will." "Make him?" Brandon shouted, his voice echoing through the line before it went dead. Rebecca set the phone down, her hands shaking. For the first time, she didn't rush to obey. Instead, she stood at the window, watching the city pulse below her reflection, staring back at her, a woman caught between a crumbling empire and the man who had built her world with love, not money. Rebecca came to me in the early evening, just as the cicadas were starting to hum in the trees out back. I was sitting on the porch, the old rocker creaking beneath me, a glass of iced tea sweating on the railing. The sun had dipped low, streaking the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was the kind of hour that begged for quiet. But her footsteps on the gravel cut through it. When I looked up, she was standing at the bottom of the steps, clutching her purse, as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Dad," she said softly, her voice cracking on the word. I set my glass down and straightened. For a moment, neither of us moved. It struck me then how long it had been since she'd come to the house without Brandon trailing behind. Finally, she climbed the steps and stood in front of me. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "All these years..." It was you. I let out a slow breath. Because love doesn't ask for recognition, Rebecca. I wasn't keeping score. I just wanted you safe. Her eyes filled and she shook her head. Safe, Dad. I sat there while he mocked you, while I stayed quiet. And now I find out you carried him all this time. I don't understand how you could, because you were my little girl. I cut in my voice, firm but not unkind. And I'd have done anything to make sure you had a life better than mine. But disrespect, I leaned forward, my eyes holding hers, cannot go unanswered. She broke, then tears spilling over as she sank onto the porch step beside me. Her shoulders shook and she buried her face in her hands. I wanted to reach for her to take away the weight she carried, but I knew some burdens had to be felt before they could be lifted. I should have said something that night, she choked out, when he humiliated you. I saw it. I heard it, and I just sat there. I thought keeping the peace was better, but now everything's broken anyway. I put my arm around her, pulling her close. Peace at the cost of your soul isn't peace, sweetheart. It's surrender, and you've carried that silence long enough. She looked up at me, then eyes shimmering. He's calling me, begging me to fix it. He says you're the reason the company is falling apart. Is it true I didn't look away? Your husband built his empire on my back. Every loan, every deal, every ounce of credibility, he stood on what I gave him, and now he falls on his own. That's the truth. Rebecca let out a sob, pressing her forehead to my shoulder. For the first time in years, it felt like she was my little girl again. The one who used to run to me during storms. I kept rocking us slowly, the old chair creaking with each sway. The night was coming on cicadas, louder, now a neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the street. Life went on ordinary and steady, even as our world shifted around us. Rebecca pulled back after a while, wiping at her cheeks. What happens now, Dad? I didn't answer right away. The truth was still forming, but one thing I knew, whatever came next, I wouldn't carry it in silence anymore. Rebecca sat quietly beside me for a long while, her breathing uneven as she tried to steady herself. The porch light flickered on automatically, casting a pale glow over the chipped paint, and the two of us sitting shoulder to shoulder. I could feel the weight of her questions before she spoke them. Dad, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I've chosen wrong all these years? What if I've been blind? I turned toward her, my rocker creaking to a stop. We all make choices thinking we're protecting something. Sometimes it takes time to see the cost. I paused, letting the silence hold us both. But blindness doesn't last forever. The question is what you do once you finally see. She pressed her lips together, trembling. I see now. I see how he's used you, how I let him. And it kills me to think I helped in that silence. I reach for her hand, my rough fingers closing around hers. Rebecca, guilt can eat a person alive, but it doesn't heal anything. What matters is what you do from here on. The night deepened, and fireflies winked across the yard. Rebecca leaned her head against my shoulder like she used to as a child. For a moment it felt like time had folded back, giving me the daughter I remembered before ambition and marriage had pulled her away. She broke the quiet with a trembling sigh. He's desperate, Dad. Brandon's calling me nonstop. He says without you it's all over. It is over, I said simply. He built the tower out of borrowed bricks, and now the mortar's crumbling. That's not on me, that's on him. Her voice caught. And what about us? What about me? I tightened my hold on her hand. You're not a tower, Rebecca. You're my daughter. And that means you'll always have a place here no matter what falls around you. She began to cry again, but this time the tears were different, less of shame, more of release. At last she lifted her head, eyes swollen but clear. I want to make this right, Dad. I don't know how yet, but I don't want to live in silence anymore. I gave her a nod, slow and firm. That's all I ever wanted. Not perfection, not loyalty to me over him. Just the courage to stand where your heart knows you should. The cicadas droned steady as a heartbeat. I knew the storm wasn't finished, not for her, not for me. Brandon would thrash, claw, and blame. But as I looked at Rebecca leaning close with her hand still in mine, I felt something steady return. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of truth between us. And no empire, no title, no man's arrogance could take that away. Brandon called the banks first, his voice loud enough that even the receptionist downstairs could hear every word. This is a misunderstanding. My father-in-law will set things right. He's just old confused. Give us a few days and everything will be back on track." But the line went silent and he slammed the phone down so hard the glass of water on his desk tipped over. Next, he tried the investors. "Don't pull your funds. This company is still viable. We have contracts." His words choked when they reminded him that contracts mean nothing when accounts are frozen. By the time evening shadows stretched across the office floor, Brandon's desperation had turned to fury. He drove home, his tie, loosened eyes wild, muttering to himself the whole way. Rebecca was in the living room when he barged through the door. She had been sitting quietly nursing a cup of tea, but the look on his face made her set it down quickly. "What happened?" she asked cautiously. He threw his briefcase across the room, papers spilling like leaves in a storm. "Your father." He spat, his voice sharp as broken glass. "He's behind all of this. I know it. He pulled the guarantees, he poisoned the banks. And if he doesn't back off..." Brandon's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing with cold malice. "If he doesn't back off, I'll make sure he ends up in a nursing home where he belongs." The words hung in the air like a foul stench. Rebecca froze, her heart hammering. For years she had overlooked his arrogance, his temper, convincing herself he was just ambitious, just under pressure. But this was cruelty laid bare. She stood slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Brandon, do you even hear yourself? That's my father you're talking about. The man who carried you when no one else would." Brandon scoffed. "Carried me. He held me back, always watching, always judging. You think he gave me anything? He's been waiting for me to slip and now he's celebrating it." Rebecca's hands trembled, but her voice came steady, stronger than she expected. "Enough, Brandon. Dad gave you everything. His name, his trust, his money, and you gave him nothing but shame." The room fell still. For the first time, Rebecca's words didn't falter, and for the first time, Brandon had no clever retort. His face twisted, rage pouring through every line. He slammed both hands against the table, the sound rattling the silverware. But even in his fury, there was nothing he could do to stop what was already unraveling. He stood there breathing hard, his empire in ruins, his marriage cracking, and his mask finally slipping for Rebecca to see. Brandon's chest heaved as he glared across the room, his knuckles white against the table. For a moment, I imagine Rebecca saw the man she had once fallen in love with buried beneath the fury. But that man was gone, replaced by someone desperate enough to threaten the very father who had kept him afloat. "Rebecca," he said, voice shaking with rage, "you don't understand how this works. Your father has made me look weak. If word gets out that he pulled the guarantees, I'm finished. And if I'm finished, you're finished too." She stood taller, no longer shrinking under his shadow. "No, Brandon. I'll be fine. I still have my father. I still have myself. You're the one who's finished, and it's no one's fault but your own." Her defiance seemed to strike him harder than any bank notice or investor call. Brandon's mouth twisted as though he might lash out, but all he managed was another violent slam of his fist against the table. The sound reverberated through the apartment, but Rebecca didn't flinch this time. "You think you can stand there and lecture me?" he shouted. "Without me, you'd be nothing." Rebecca's voice rose above his. "Without Dad, you would never have had a company. Without him, you would never have had a single loan. Without him, you would have been nothing." The truth landed like a hammer. Brandon staggered back a step, his face pale beneath the flush of anger. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His empire, his image, even his marriage. Everything he thought he controlled was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing left to hide behind. For the first time, silence fell, not because Rebecca was afraid, but because Brandon had no fight left in him. He stood there powerless, the mask gone, the man revealed. And in that silence, Rebecca turned away, walking toward the door with steady steps. She had chosen. The news broke just before dawn. I was sipping my first cup of coffee, the old percolator still sputtering on the counter, when the anchor's voice cut through the quiet. "Cole and Partners Realty has officially filed for bankruptcy." She said, her tone clipped professional, but carrying that slight note of relish newscasters couldn't hide when a giant fell. Court documents show massive outstanding debts and a trail of guarantees withdrawn by Walter Grant, father-in-law of CEO Brandon Cole. Sources close to the matter confirmed that without these guarantees, the company could not secure further funding. I leaned back in my chair, coffee warm in my hand, and let the words settle. It wasn't joy I felt, not exactly. It was heavier than that, deeper, like a truth too long buried had finally clawed its way to daylight. By mid-morning, the story had spread everywhere. Neighbors came by pretending to borrow sugar or ask about the weather, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes. At the diner, I overheard men in work shirts shaking their heads. Knew that coal boy was full of hot air, one said, always flashing his watch, talking big deals. Look at him now. At church that Sunday, whispers followed Rebecca as she slipped into the pew beside me. Folks who once fawned over Brandon now cluck their tongues, shaking their heads at the spectacle. That kind of pride never ends well, the pastor murmured to me later, offering a squeeze of my hand. And in the quiet aisles of the grocery store, women pushing carts traded the latest updates. Did you hear the bank froze his accounts? They say he owes half the city. Brandon had once strutted through these same streets, his car shining, his suits pressed sharp enough to cut. Now his name was spoken with the same disdain reserved for cheats and swindlers. The company offices shut their doors within the week. Reporters swarmed, snapping photos of movers hauling out desks and computers. Headlines screamed from every stand, Brandon Cole falls from grace. From millionaire to bankrupt, in months. The untold debt behind the empire. Rebecca saw it all unravel. I think part of her still wanted to shield him, to remember the man she had once chosen. But the cruelty he had shown, the threat against me, had burned something out of her. One evening, she arrived at my porch with a single suitcase in her hand. Her eyes were tired but steady. I can't stay with him anymore, Dad, she said. Not after everything. I should have come sooner. I took the bag from her and set it inside. You came when you were ready, I told her. That's all that matters. She sat down in the rocker beside mine, the two of us swaying in rhythm as the crickets sang. For the first time in years, she looked at peace. Brandon, meanwhile, raged against the tide. He gave interviews, shouted about conspiracies, painted himself as the victim of betrayal. But every word only dug his hole deeper. The documents were public, the numbers undeniable. He wasn't the visionary he had claimed. He was a man propped up by another's sacrifice, and now the world saw him for what he was. And me, I didn't raise a fist. I didn't need to. All I had done was step back and let the truth breathe. And the truth, once free, did all the work. The first cool breeze of fall swept through Central Park as I sat on a worn wooden bench, my cane propped against my knee. Around me, life carried on in its small, ordinary rhythms. Children chasing each other across the grass, a young couple laying out a checkered blanket, an old man jogging slowly by, with his dog trotting faithfully at his side. The world hadn't paused for Brandon's collapse, nor for my own long years of silence. That was the strange mercy of life. It kept moving whether you were ready or not. Rebecca sat beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't said a word since we arrived, and I hadn't asked her to. Sometimes words only tangle what silence can smooth. We just sat there, watching the world turn, two souls who had weathered the same storm, finally finding shelter in each other's company. A child's laughter rang out high and clear, and I saw Rebecca's face soften. She tilted her head back, eyes glistening not with tears of sorrow, but with something gentler, almost like release. She didn't reach for my hand, but she didn't need to. Her nearness was enough. For so long I had imagined this moment would come with speeches, explanations, apologies, promises. But now, as the late sun stretched golden fingers across the grass, I understood that none of that was required. Forgiveness often came not with thunder, but with a whisper, a shared quiet that said, "We've both seen enough." Somewhere across town, Brandon sat in a very different kind of silence. I'd heard through the grapevine, neighbors, reporters, even Frank, who still kept his ear to the ground, that he was holed up in the apartment that had once been a symbol of his triumph. The penthouse windows still looked out over the city, but now the furniture had been repossessed. The champagne glasses boxed away, the laughter of dinner parties long gone. He stood in front of the mirror-tie undone shirt, rumpled eyes hollow. The man who once filled entire rooms with bravado now stared at a reflection he no longer recognized. There was no one left to call, no deal to broker, no father-in-law to prop him up. Just a man stripped bare, forced to face the ruins of his own pride. I didn't take satisfaction in his loneliness, though I won't deny there was a kind of justice in it. Justice, I'd come to realize, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly, letting the weight of truth press down until a man either bends or breaks. I shifted on the bench, watching a boy roll a bright red ball across the path, his little sister chasing after it with wild delight. Rebecca gave a small laugh, the first I'd heard from her in months. I turned to look at her, and for a moment, the lines of worry around her eyes softened. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. In the hush between us, I felt the bond reweaving itself, fragile but real. Not perfect, not healed entirely, but alive. The quiet thunder of it filled my chest, steady and sure. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.